Ladies and gentlemen, today we step into the dark and eerie history of one of Australia's most infamous prisons, Boggo Road Gaol. A place once filled with some of the country's most dangerous criminals, it now stands as a chilling reminder of its brutal past. But beyond its iron bars and high walls lies a terrifying reputation. It is believed to be one of the most haunted prisons in Australia. Boggo Road Gaol, located in Brisbane, Queensland, is one of the most infamous prisons in Australian history. Established in 1883, it was designed as a high-security facility meant to house the most dangerous criminals of its time. Over its 109 years of operation, the prison witnessed countless stories of violence, suffering, and death, earning it a notorious reputation. Its high walls, lined with guard towers and barbed wire, made it an impenetrable fortress where inmates faced harsh punishments, cruel treatment, and inhumane conditions. In its early years, Boggo Road was used primarily as a prison for men, but later, a separate section for women was introduced, making it one of the few facilities in Australia to house both male and female prisoners. The women's prison was eventually closed in 1921, but the men's prison remained fully operational until the early 1990s. One of the most shocking aspects of Boggo Road was its harsh disciplinary system. Prisoners were often subjected to severe beatings, long hours of forced labor, and extreme isolation. The prison's infamous solitary confinement cells, including the feared black hole, were used to break the will of the most unruly inmates. These cells were dark, cold, and devoid of human interaction, often leading prisoners to lose their sanity. Riots and hunger strikes became commonplace, especially during the 1970s and 1980s, when prisoners protested against the overcrowded and inhumane conditions. The 1980s riots were particularly violent, with prisoners setting their mattresses on fire and engaging in brutal fights with the guards. The prison administration responded with extreme force, using batons, tear gas, and isolation to suppress the uprisings. Many prisoners were severely injured, and some even died due to the violent clashes. Despite these terrible conditions, the prison remained operational for more than a century. Over the years, thousands of criminals passed through its gates, many of them never leaving alive. The executions, mistreatment, and psychological torment that took place within its walls have left a lasting mark, making Boggo Road a place where history and horror intertwine. Boggo Road Gaol wasn't just a place for incarcerating criminals. It was a living nightmare for those who found themselves trapped inside. The prison quickly gained a brutal reputation due to its extreme overcrowding, violent environment, and harsh disciplinary measures. Prisoners endured intolerable conditions, including filthy, cramped cells, poor sanitation, and meager food rations. Diseases ran rampant, and medical care was severely inadequate, leaving many inmates to suffer untreated illnesses and injuries. One of the most infamous aspects of Boggo Road was its treatment of prisoners. Guards were known to be excessively brutal, often using physical beatings, starvation, and extended solitary confinement as punishments. The prison's black hole, a tiny, windowless isolation cell, was reserved for the worst offenders or those who defied the system. Inmates who spent time there were left in total darkness for days or weeks, with barely any food or water. Many emerged mentally broken, and some never recovered from the psychological trauma. As the prison population grew, so did tensions. By the 1960s and 1970s, Boggo Road had become one of the most overcrowded and violent prisons in Australia. Fights between inmates were a daily occurrence, often ending in severe injuries or even death. Gang rivalries made life even more dangerous, with certain groups controlling the flow of contraband, including drugs and weapons. The prisoners' frustration with these inhumane conditions eventually boiled over into riots. Some of the worst uprisings took place in the 1980s, when inmates, desperate for better treatment, set fire to their bedding and staged violent protests. These riots led to clashes with prison guards, who retaliated with extreme force, using batons and tear gas to regain control. Some inmates were so severely beaten that they had to be hospitalized, while others were thrown into solitary confinement for months as punishment. Beyond the violence of daily prison life, executions at Boggo Road added to its dark reputation. The prison became one of Australia's most notorious execution sites, with 42 prisoners meeting their end at the gallows. Hangings were often botched, leading to slow and painful deaths. Witnesses reported cases where prisoners struggled for minutes, their bodies twitching and convulsing as they suffocated. The final execution at Boggo Road was that of Ernest Austin in 1913, a man whose ghost is still said to haunt the prison today. For many inmates at Boggo Road Jail, a life sentence behind bars was the worst fate they could imagine, but for 42 unfortunate prisoners, the reality was even darker. Between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Boggo Road became one of Australia's most infamous execution sites, where some of the country's most dangerous criminals met their end at the gallows. Executions were carried out by hanging, a method meant to deliver a swift death, but often resulted in gruesome and painful last moments. In many cases, the rope length was miscalculated, leading to either slow strangulation or decapitation. Public hangings were banned in Australia in the late 19th century, so these executions took place within the prison walls, witnessed only by a small group of officials, guards, and occasionally journalists. However, the screams and final struggles of the condemned often echoed through the corridors, terrifying the other inmates. One of the most infamous executions in Boggo Road's history was that of Ernest Austin in 1913, the last person to be legally hanged in Queensland. Austin had been convicted of the brutal rape and murder of an 11-year-old girl, a crime that shocked the nation. His execution was meant to be swift, but his story did not end at the gallows. Shortly after his death, strange occurrences began happening in the prison. Guards and prisoners alike reported hearing eerily cheerful laughter echoing through the halls, especially near the gallows where Austin had been executed. Some claimed to have seen his ghost standing in the shadows, grinning as if mocking the living. The ghost of Ernest Austin soon became a legend within the prison. Inmates feared being left alone at night, terrified that Austin's spirit would appear to them in the darkness. Some even reported feeling an unseen presence breathing down their necks, while others swore they saw his spectral figure watching them from the gallows. The psychological toll of these hauntings was so severe that some prisoners refused to sleep, fearing they would wake up to find Austin standing over them. Even after the prison shut down in 1992, visitors and paranormal investigators continued to report strange occurrences, reinforcing the belief that Austin's spirit never left the prison. For decades, Boggo Road Jail has been at the center of terrifying ghost stories, with countless reports of unexplainable paranormal activity. Former inmates, guards, and visitors have all claimed to experience strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and chilling sensations while walking through the prison's decaying halls. These reports are so widespread that Boggo Road has been dubbed one of the most haunted places in Australia. One of the most common experiences involves phantom footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. Visitors have reported hearing heavy boots stomping down hallways, only to find no one there. Some believe these sounds belong to the ghosts of long-dead prison guards, still patrolling the grounds as if they never left their posts. Others speculate that the footsteps could belong to executed prisoners, forever trapped in the place where they met their fate. Another frequently reported phenomenon is whispering voices. Many visitors have described hearing muffled conversations, cries for help, or even sinister laughter, particularly in the execution chamber and solitary confinement cells. Paranormal investigators who have conducted EVP, electronic voice phenomena, recordings inside the prison claim to have captured eerie voices responding to their questions, sometimes whispering chilling phrases like, "Get out," or "Help me." Perhaps the most terrifying experiences involve full-bodied apparitions, ghostly figures that appear suddenly before vanishing into thin air. Some visitors have described seeing dark shadows moving through the corridors, while others have witnessed clear images of men in prison uniforms standing in doorways, staring at them with hollow eyes. The most famous ghostly figure is believed to be Ernest Austin, the last man executed at Boggo Road, who is said to laugh at visitors from the darkness, sending chills down their spines. The prison's black hole, a small, pitch-black solitary confinement cell, is considered one of the most haunted areas in the entire facility. Inmates who were locked inside for extended periods often emerged mentally disturbed, claiming they were whispered to by unseen forces. Even today, those who enter the cell report feeling overwhelming dread, nausea, or an intense sensation of being watched. Some have even claimed to be touched or pushed by invisible hands, reinforcing the belief that restless spirits still inhabit the space. Temperature drops are another common occurrence in Boggo Road. Tour guides and visitors have documented sudden shifts in temperature, where a warm room will suddenly become freezing cold in a matter of seconds. Paranormal researchers believe that such drastic temperature changes indicate a spirit's presence, as ghosts are thought to draw energy from their surroundings to manifest. With so many eyewitness accounts and unexplained events, it is no wonder that Boggo Road remains one of Australia's most feared and mysterious locations. Throughout its 109-year history, Boggo Road Gaol housed some of Australia's most ruthless criminals, from cold-blooded murderers to master escape artists. These inmates, feared both inside and outside the prison walls, left behind chilling legacies, their stories forever entwined with the dark history of the jail. Some of their spirits are even believed to still haunt the prison today, lingering in the very cells where they once plotted their next moves. Slim Halliday, the Houdini of Boggo Road. One of the most legendary inmates to ever set foot in Boggo Road was Slim Halliday, often called the Houdini of Boggo Road, due to his unbelievable escape attempts. Halliday, a notorious thief and armed robber, was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of multiple violent crimes. However, he refused to accept his fate behind bars. Halliday's most daring escape came in 1940, when he scaled the prison walls using a makeshift rope crafted from bedsheets. He managed to slip past the guards and vanish into the night, sparking one of Queensland's biggest manhunts. Although he was eventually captured, this was not his last attempt. Halliday escaped yet again, proving himself to be one of Australia's most resourceful criminals. Each time he was caught, he was placed in solitary confinement, but even the harshest punishments couldn't break his spirit. To this day, visitors claim to feel an eerie presence near Halliday's former cell, with some reporting faint whispers and the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth, as if his restless soul is still planning his next great escape. Ernest Halliday, the killer who showed no remorse. Another notorious inmate was Ernest Halliday, no relation to Slim, a man convicted of multiple murders and violent crimes. Known for his ruthless nature, Halliday was feared by both inmates and guards alike. His criminal career was marked by brutal attacks, stabbings, and cold-blooded executions of those who crossed him. Unlike Slim Halliday, who was known for his intelligence and escape artistry, Halliday had no interest in running. He was a man who thrived on fear, often using intimidation to control other prisoners. He was so dangerous that he was kept under constant surveillance, with guards refusing to turn their backs on him, even for a second. His time in Boggo Road was filled with violence, and many believe his dark energy still lingers within the prison walls. Some visitors have reported a shadowy figure lurking near the cells, with an overwhelming sense of unease and dread in the air. Many believe it is the lingering spirit of Halliday. Other notorious criminals and their brutal stories. Boggo Road Gaol housed many other criminals whose names sent shivers down the spines of Australians. Among them were Patrick Kenneth, a bushranger and convicted murderer, who was executed at the prison's gallows in the early 1900s. James Finch and John Stewart, convicted of the infamous whiskey Ogogo firebombing, which killed 15 people in 1973. Their case remains one of the most controversial in Australian history, with conspiracy theories surrounding their trial. Multiple serial killers and violent gang members, many of whom met their fate within the prison's walls, either through execution or brutal prison justice at the hands of other inmates. These criminals turned Boggo Road into a breeding ground for fear, violence, and suffering, leaving behind an eerie legacy that still haunts the prison today. Boggo Road Jail was more than just a prison. It was a pressure cooker of violence, injustice, and human suffering. The conditions inside were so harsh and inhumane that over time, the inmates refused to stay silent. Instead, they fought back with riots, hunger strikes, and violent protests, turning the prison into a battleground between desperate prisoners and brutal guards. Overcrowding and the breaking point. By the mid-20th century, Boggo Road had become severely overcrowded, with cells designed for one prisoner cramming in 2 or 3 men. The lack of space led to fights, gang conflicts, and stabbings becoming an everyday occurrence. Prisoners lived in filth, with no proper plumbing, limited food rations, and poor medical care. Disease outbreaks were common, but sick inmates were often ignored or given minimal treatment, leading to unnecessary deaths. The guards, instead of maintaining order, were often the worst abusers. Reports from former inmates describe guards using excessive force, beatings, and psychological torture to keep prisoners under control. Punishments were severe. Solitary confinement in the infamous black hole was a common method used to break prisoners' spirits. The prison administration ignored complaints, which only added fuel to the growing fire of rebellion. The riots began, the 1970s uprising. The first major riot at Boggo Road erupted in the 1970s, when inmates, frustrated by years of abuse and neglect, decided to take drastic action. They set fire to their bedding, smashed windows, and barricaded themselves inside their cells, demanding better living conditions. The guards retaliated with batons, tear gas, and riot shields, beating prisoners into submission. Despite the brutal response, the 1970s riots drew public attention to the cruel conditions inside the prison. For the first time, the outside world began to question whether Boggo Road was simply a prison or a house of torture. The 1980s riots, the most violent revolts. The worst riots came in the 1980s, when Boggo Road became one of the most violent prisons in Australia. Inmates, angry over poor food, overcrowding, and ongoing mistreatment, staged a full-scale uprising. Prisoners set their mattresses on fire, filling the halls with thick smoke. They broke into supply rooms, using stolen tools as makeshift weapons. Walls were smeared with slogans written in blood, demanding human rights. Inmates climbed onto the rooftops, shouting their demands to the press and the public below. The authorities responded with overwhelming force. Riot police stormed the prison, beating inmates into submission. Several prisoners were severely injured, and some were left unconscious in their cells. Survivors later described the incident as a massacre, with guards deliberately targeting specific prisoners for revenge. Hunger strikes and the fall of Boggo Road. After years of brutality and oppression, prisoners resorted to hunger strikes as a final form of protest. They refused to eat for days, demanding better conditions, medical care, and basic human rights. Some became so weak that they had to be hospitalized. The constant riots and bad publicity eventually forced the government to take action. By the late 1980s, human rights activists and the media had exposed the horrors of Boggo Road, leading to public outcry. The prison was deemed unfit for modern correctional standards, and in 1992, it was permanently shut down, bringing an end to one of Australia's darkest chapters in prison history. Boggo Road Jail was notorious for its brutal punishments, but none were feared more than solitary confinement, a method designed to break even the strongest of prisoners. Within the prison's walls lay the infamous black hole, a pitch-black, windowless cell where inmates were locked away for days, weeks, or even months. It was a place of absolute isolation, where prisoners faced psychological torment, starvation, and complete sensory deprivation. The purpose of the black hole, breaking the human spirit. Solitary confinement in Boggo Road was not just about punishing unruly inmates. It was about crushing their will to resist. Guards used it as a tool to control rebellious prisoners, silence troublemakers, and instill fear in others. Those who dared to defy the system, participate in riots, or refused to follow orders were thrown into the black hole without warning, often without knowing when, or if, they would be released. Inside the cramped, airless chamber, prisoners faced complete darkness, their only company being the rats and cockroaches that infested the prison. With no windows and only a small slot for food, inmates lost all sense of time, their days blending into a never-ending nightmare. Many who entered the black hole emerged mentally shattered, suffering from paranoia, hallucinations, and extreme anxiety. Some never recovered, spending the rest of their lives in a permanent state of psychological distress. Torture in solitary, the methods used to break prisoners. Solitary confinement in Boggo Road was not just about isolation. It was a form of psychological and physical torture. Guards devised cruel ways to make the punishment even more unbearable. Starvation tactics. Prisoners were often given barely enough food to survive, sometimes just a piece of stale bread and water. Many emerged from confinement dangerously malnourished and weak. Temperature extremes. The cell would be left freezing cold in winter and stifling hot in summer, making it nearly impossible to sleep or rest. Sensory deprivation. Inmates were left in complete silence and darkness, with no human interaction. Some began hearing voices and experiencing hallucinations, their minds deteriorating from the lack of stimulation. Random beatings. Some prisoners reported being dragged out and beaten by guards, only to be thrown back inside the cell with no medical attention. These extreme conditions turned solitary confinement into a fate worse than death for many inmates. Some prisoners, unable to cope with the mental and physical strain, took their own lives rather than endure another day in the darkness. Others emerged so broken that they became silent, unresponsive shells of their former selves, unable to function normally ever again. Hauntings of the black hole, the spirits of the damned. Even after the prison's closure in 1992, the energy of the suffering that took place inside the black hole never faded. Paranormal investigators and visitors have reported chilling encounters, claiming that the spirits of those who died in solitary confinement still linger. Some have heard whispers in the darkness, felt cold hands brush against their skin, or seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the cell. One of the most terrifying claims is that visitors who step inside the black hole sometimes experience a sudden sense of suffocation, as if an invisible force is pressing down on their chest. Others have collapsed or fled in terror, overwhelmed by an unexplainable feeling of dread and despair. Some say that the souls of prisoners who lost their minds in solitary are still trapped there, forever reliving the torment they endured. For those who committed the most heinous crimes, there was no escape from justice, only death at the gallows. Boggo Road Gaol was one of Australia's most notorious execution sites, where prisoners sentenced to death faced their final moments in terror. Between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, 42 men were led to the gallows, their crimes condemned by the courts, their fates sealed by the noose. The execution chamber, a place of fear and death. The execution chamber at Boggo Road was a small, cold room where the condemned took their final steps toward the noose. The air inside was thick with fear, desperation, and the weight of death. The walls had seen it all, men begging for mercy, others whispering last prayers, and some standing defiantly as they faced the hangman. Prisoners sentenced to death were kept in isolation in the days leading up to their execution, locked away in a cell with only their thoughts. They were given one final meal, but many could barely eat, knowing that death awaited them in the morning. Some tried to escape their fate by taking their own lives, while others spent their final hours in uncontrollable panic, crying or screaming. As the moment arrived, the condemned were dragged to the gallows by guards. Some walked in silence, resigned to their fate. Others fought back, screaming and struggling, forcing guards to restrain them. Once on the platform, the hangman placed a hood over their head, their vision swallowed by darkness. The noose was tightened around their neck, and with the pull of a lever, the trapdoor beneath them would snap open, sending them plunging into the void. But not all executions went as planned. Some rope lengths were miscalculated, resulting in slow strangulation rather than a quick death. Instead of instant neck breaking, some men kicked and gasped for air, their bodies convulsing for minutes before finally going still. These horrifying moments only reinforced the prison's reputation as a place of brutality and suffering. The final words of the condemned. Many of the executed prisoners left chilling final words before the noose ended their lives. Some begged for forgiveness, whispering prayers in their last moments. Others cursed the guards, the judges, and the system that sentenced them to death, refusing to show remorse. There were even cases where condemned men laughed in the face of death, their eerie chuckles echoing through the chamber as they awaited their fate. One of the most infamous executions at Boggo Road was that of Ernest, the last man to be hanged in Queensland in 1913. His crime was so horrific that there was no sympathy for his fate, yet his execution is remembered for the terrifying legend it created. After his death, rumors spread that Austin had laughed maniacally on the gallows, mocking his executioners. Some say he even declared that he would return to haunt the prison forever, a promise that many believe he kept. Ghosts of the Gallows, the haunting legacy of executions. Even after Boggo Road Gaol closed its doors in 1992, the spirits of those executed were said to remain. The gallows became a hotspot for paranormal activity, with visitors and ghost hunters reporting strange occurrences. Some have heard unseen voices whispering in the darkness, while others have felt an unexplainable cold chill pass through them near the execution chamber. Many believe that the pain and terror of the condemned left a permanent mark on the prison, creating an atmosphere of restless energy and sorrow. Some visitors have even claimed to see shadowy figures standing near the gallows, as if the spirits of the executed are still waiting for their final judgment. While Boggo Road Gaol is often remembered for its male prisoners and violent riots, a lesser-known but equally dark chapter in its history is the incarceration of women. For decades, the prison housed female convicts, unwed mothers, and women accused of petty crimes, subjecting them to harsh conditions, brutal punishments, and overwhelming isolation. Life for women inside Boggo Road was just as terrifying, if not worse, than for the men, as they faced cruel treatment from guards, disease, and a rigid society that offered them no second chances. The female division, a prison within a prison. The Boggo Road Women's Prison, officially known as Division 2, was a separate wing of the jail, reserved exclusively for female prisoners. Many of the women confined here were not dangerous criminals, but victims of a harsh judicial system. Some were imprisoned for stealing food to feed their children, while others were sent away for being unmarried mothers, a crime in the eyes of society at the time. Despite the fact that many of them posed no real threat, they were treated just as brutally as the worst offenders. The conditions in the women's prison were horrific. The cells were overcrowded, with prisoners forced to share small, filthy spaces infested with rats and cockroaches. Sanitation was nearly non-existent, and women were given only basic necessities, often lacking proper hygiene products. Many suffered from malnutrition and untreated illnesses, as the prison provided minimal medical care. Pregnant women were forced to give birth inside the prison, often in unsanitary conditions, with their newborns sometimes being taken away from them immediately. Women who refused to obey orders or questioned authority were beaten, locked in solitary confinement, or publicly humiliated by both guards and fellow inmates. Those accused of prostitution or immorality were subjected to particular cruelty, as society saw them as beyond redemption. Punishment and control, keeping women in line. The punishments inside the women's division were designed to break the spirit of the inmates. Some of the most feared punishments included solitary confinement in the black hole. Just like the men, female prisoners were sometimes thrown into solitary confinement, where they were left in complete darkness for days or weeks. Many emerged mentally disturbed, broken, or unresponsive. Hard labor and humiliation. Women were forced to perform grueling labor, such as scrubbing floors for hours, sewing in poor conditions, or washing laundry with bare hands in freezing water. Public whippings and verbal abuse. Some guards took pleasure in humiliating female prisoners, yelling slurs at them, or mocking them for their sins. Reports suggest that some were even physically punished in front of others, as a warning to anyone who dared to disobey prison rules. Infamous female prisoners of Boggo Road. While many of the women sent to Boggo Road were imprisoned for minor offenses, some became infamous criminals, leaving behind dark stories that still haunt the prison today. Ellen Thompson, the only woman to ever be hanged in Queensland. Ellen was convicted of murdering her much older husband in 1887. Many believe she was wrongly accused and was a victim of a misogynistic legal system that was quick to punish women but slow to seek justice for them. Her ghost is said to haunt the prison, with visitors claiming to hear soft crying and whispers in the corridors. Valda Hansen, a woman who became known for her violent outbursts inside the prison. Hansen was feared even by other inmates. She was notorious for attacking guards and fellow prisoners, refusing to conform to the brutal prison system. The female wardens, enforcers, or victims themselves. The women's division was overseen by female wardens, many of whom enforced strict discipline and punishments. Some wardens were just as cruel as their male counterparts, beating prisoners, withholding food, or humiliating women who stepped out of line. However, others were simply products of the system, trapped in their own kind of prison, forced to follow orders or risk losing their jobs. Despite their harsh reputation, some female wardens tried to advocate for better conditions, recognizing the suffering of the prisoners. But their voices were often ignored, and the cycle of abuse continued for decades. The closure of the women's prison, a long overdue end. As human rights movements gained momentum in Australia, pressure mounted to improve prison conditions for female inmates. By the late 20th century, stories of abuse and mistreatment inside Boggo Road had leaked to the public, sparking outrage and demands for reform. Eventually, the women's prison was shut down, marking the end of one of the darkest chapters in Boggo Road's history. Even today, the ghosts of female prisoners are said to remain. Visitors claim to hear soft sobbing, feel cold hands touching their shoulders, or see the shadows of women wandering the abandoned corridors. Their suffering may have ended in life, but their spirits still linger, telling a story of injustice, cruelty, and resilience in the face of unimaginable hardship. Long after its closure in 1992, Boggo Road Gaol has remained one of Australia's most notorious sites for paranormal activity. With its long history of violence, executions, and suffering, it is no surprise that many believe the prison is still haunted by the spirits of its former inmates and execution victims. Countless visitors, ghost hunters, and even former prison guards have reported unexplained occurrences, ranging from eerie whispers and shadowy figures to sudden drops in temperature and violent poltergeist activity. Ghostly encounters, the haunting of Boggo Road. Since the prison reopened as a historical site, tour guides and visitors alike have experienced terrifying paranormal encounters. Some of the most chilling reports include disembodied voices and whispering. People walking through the empty cell blocks often hear soft whispers behind them, only to turn around and find no one there. Some claim to have heard prisoners calling out, muttering words like, "Help me," or "Get out." Shadow figures and apparitions. Numerous accounts describe dark, human-like figures standing in the corridors, only to vanish when approached. Some visitors even claim to have seen full-body apparitions of prisoners, dressed in old prison uniforms, staring at them from behind the bars. Cold spots and sudden temperature drops. In certain areas of the prison, particularly near the execution chamber and solitary confinement cells, people often report sudden, unexplained chills, even on warm nights. Paranormal investigators believe this is a sign of spiritual energy lingering in the space. Poltergeist activity and physical contact. Some visitors have reported feeling unseen hands grabbing them, being pushed or scratched, or hearing loud bangs and doors slamming shut on their own. Objects have also been known to move by themselves, as if an invisible force is still lingering within the prison walls. One of the most infamous stories comes from security guards who worked at the prison after its closure. Many refused to patrol alone at night, claiming they often heard footsteps echoing through the hallways, even though the prison was empty. Some even quit their jobs, unable to handle the overwhelming sense of dread that filled the air. The ghost of Ernest Austin, the laughing spirit of the gallows. Perhaps the most terrifying spirit said to haunt Boggo Road is Ernest Austin, the last man to be executed at the prison in 1913. According to legend, Austin laughed maniacally on the gallows, taunting the executioner and claiming that he would haunt the prison forever. Many believe he kept his word, as numerous reports of his ghostly presence have surfaced over the years. Tour guides and visitors claim to have heard sinister laughter echoing through the prison at night, even when no one else is around. Some have seen a tall, shadowy figure lurking near the gallows, only to have it disappear into thin air. Paranormal experts suggest that Austin's spirit may have become attached to the prison, reliving his final moments over and over again. The cursed solitary cells, spirits of the broken. The solitary confinement cells, particularly the dreaded black hole, are another major hotspot for paranormal activity. Many who enter these dark, cramped spaces report feeling intense fear, nausea, and sudden dizziness, as if the walls themselves hold the suffering of past inmates. Some have even heard screams or sobbing, believed to be the voices of prisoners who went mad from isolation. One of the most chilling experiences involves visitors entering a completely empty cell, only to suddenly feel the air grow heavy and thick, as if an invisible presence is watching them closely. Some report feeling pressure on their chest, shortness of breath, or even unseen hands brushing against them, as if a tormented soul is still trapped inside, reaching out for help. Modern-day paranormal investigations, the truth behind the hauntings. Over the years, numerous ghost hunting teams and paranormal researchers have conducted investigations at Boggo Road, using advanced equipment such as EMF detectors, spirit boxes, and thermal cameras. Their findings have only strengthened the prison's reputation as a haunted location. Some teams have captured EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, in which ghostly voices can be heard responding to questions. Others have recorded mysterious orbs and shadow figures moving across security footage, proving that something unexplainable still lingers within the prison walls. Psychics and spiritual mediums who have visited Boggo Road claim that the prison is filled with unsettled spirits, unable to move on due to the violence, injustice, and suffering they endured in life. Some believe that the ghosts remain because they died without closure, their stories forever trapped in the stone and iron of Boggo Road. Boggo Road Gaol stands as a chilling reminder of Australia's dark penal history, where suffering, violence, and death were part of daily life. From hardened criminals and innocent victims to fearsome wardens and executed prisoners, the walls of this prison have absorbed countless stories of despair, defiance, and injustice. Even though the prison officially closed in 1992, its ghostly reputation endures, drawing visitors, historians, and paranormal investigators who seek to uncover its secrets. Whether one believes in ghosts or not, there is no denying that the energy of the past still lingers. The eerie whispers, shadowy figures, and unexplained chills all point to a place where history refuses to be forgotten. The spirits of Boggo Road may never find peace, and perhaps that is why their presence is still felt today, a silent reminder that some stories refuse to fade away.